Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is halt. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first and most common way to hear halt used is to mean to bring something to a stop or for you yourself to or some object to come to a stop. So sometimes you'll hear this used as a command, and we're going to look at some examples of that in a few minutes. Um, but but really, sometimes this verb can be used in place of stop, right? So instead of an object, maybe it's a motor vehicle stopped, right? It halted, right? It came to a stop. A second way you might hear halt used is to mean to discontinue. And discontinue can have a similar meaning as stop. With this particular definition, it frequently is used to mean that some sort of work process or activity is being stopped or being discontinued. You might hear phrases like production was halted. There's a passive voice example. You should know that halt is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all we need to do is add ing to form halting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, halt, ends in an unvoiced T sound. So we're going to add an extra syllable as we make this past tense and past participle form. It should sound like this: halted, halted. I hope you can hear that extra syllable. You might be happy or relieved to know that there are no additional phrasal verbs that we need to study with this particular verb. So we're going to move on to doing some practice with a couple different tenses today. We're going to focus on the imperative. I mentioned before that it was common to hear halt used as a command. A command, the imperative, they're the same thing. Okay? And what's unique about the imperative is that we do not have a stated subject. Um, what you'll see in the imperative, in the affirmative particularly, is the sentence beginning with that base verb. Okay, and so our subject here is implied. It's you. Could be singular, could be plural, depending on who you are speaking or writing to. Now, my affirmative example might look a little different, but I wanted to point out a way that you might hear this, particularly in TV shows or movies. If you're watching something maybe about the military and you see soldiers marching, you might hear an officer, someone who's directing that group of soldiers, they might say something like, "Company, halt." Right? So they're telling people, stop marching, stop where you are. Right? They're giving that command. They're not asking them to do it, right? They are telling them to do it. If you want to make a negative imperative sentence, so you're telling someone not to do a particular action, you can begin your sentence with do not and then the base verb, or you can use the contraction don't. Okay? You can see that in my example here. Don't halt progress. Right? So maybe someone's giving some sort of command here. Perhaps they disagree with something that's being proposed or suggested, right? And they are saying we don't want to stop the progress that we're making. Now, when you give an imperative, a command to someone else, sometimes that might seem a little direct or maybe it's too forward for you. You can always soften that by adding please to the beginning or please at the end. You don't need it in both places though. But I'm going to point out in my affirmative example, it sounds really weird for a military officer to say halt please or please halt, right? They're not worried about politeness there. They're going to be very direct and short, to the point in their communication. Now let's take a look at the simple future. As we've talked about in these videos, there are many ways to talk about future actions. One of those ways is to use be, going to, and our base verb. So with this form of the simple future, we have to pay attention to our subject. And then we're going to adjust our be verb to agree with that subject. So be might be am, is, or are. Okay, and you'll see that in some of my examples here in a moment. We tend to use this simple future, be going to in particular, to talk about plans for the future. You might hear it sometimes used for predictions as well. Let's take a look at my affirmative example here. It's a longer sentence. It says the automaker is going to halt production of that model until they can resolve issues with the batteries. Okay. I saw a sentence kind of similar to this in a news article, again, noting, right, we're going to discontinue, we're going to stop production until they can fix some problem they're having with one of the parts to this particular car. So in that affirmative example, automaker, singular, right? So you see is, going, to, and then our base verb. To do a negative simple future sentence, our structure is going to be similar. So again, we start with the form of be that matches our subject, but then we insert not, then going, to, and the base verb. You can see that in my example here. The U.S. isn't going to halt gun violence without legislative action standing up to the gun lobby. Now, this is a little bit of my personal belief, my personal prediction. I have been just horrified watching the news coverage out of Texas. My heart breaks for those poor families. And unfortunately, it feels and seems like this will continue to happen, right? We're not going to stop the horrific gun violence that occurs, unfortunately, quite regularly here in the United States until our legislative body does something. Now, let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we start with our form of be that matches the subject. The subject comes next. Then we have going, to, and our base verb. Here's another example. Are they going to halt their losing streak? And so maybe we're talking about a group of athletes, maybe a couple teams even, or sometimes people can feel like that in their work environment, in business. Might feel like they are on a losing streak, so they have loss after loss after loss, right? And here we're asking, are they going to be able to stop that continuation of losing? Now, let's take a moment to look at some words that are related to our verb halt. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So you'll see the exact same spelling. It's going to be pronounced exactly the same way. And what halt means is, used as a noun, is a suspension, either of movement or activity. So here, suspension, think a stoppage. Okay? An example of this might be, the burglary has brought business to a halt. Right? So again, this idea, it has stopped. Okay? Our next word we're going to look at is going to look very familiar. It's our progressive form, halting, but here it can be used as an adjective. And when it's used as an adjective, it generally means that we're describing something that's slow or maybe a bit hesitant, perhaps even lacking some confidence. I feel like I have seen this adjective used in a lot of literature. So books, stories, and I've heard it used in this sort of a way. She spoke in a halting voice, right? So her voice, again, that idea of kind of lacking confidence, maybe slow to answer, to respond, maybe kind of hesitating to respond. That's what an author might be trying to describe in that moment. Haltingly, right? If we add that suffix ly, we're making an adverb. And so now we're describing something that is being done in maybe a slow, hesitant, or even a nervous way. Here, nervous might kind of tie back to that idea of a lack of confidence. Okay? So now we're going to describe an action in that way. He walked haltingly toward the group. Okay? So this is not a person who confidently walked on over, right? Maybe slowly, maybe they kind of turn away for a moment before they continue on toward that particular group of people. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.